Hi, I'm Helen Wilson from UCAF, the UK Association for Accessible Formats, and I want to introduce you to our question of what 10 things. Sounds a bit of an odd title, but it's our way to gather some useful insights for some up-and-coming plans that we have. I will elaborate on this title a bit more later. This quote best sums up this presentation and some of the discussions we've been having at UCAF. It's from Matt May from Adobe with an extra word added. It says, what we have are a few people who know a lot about accessibility, and what we also need are a lot of people to know a little about it. This to us sums up that much of the guidance and support out there is currently focused on web accessibility for developers or web designers, and rightly so, of course. This is vitally important work. But web professionals in this quote are the few, and it feels sometimes that this is the only one sector of our society working on this vitally important area. And we haven't yet penetrated that wider mainstream awareness or brought on board everyone else in society to know about it yet. But what can we do to address this awareness gap? And who is the everyone else? Well, everyone else is us. And we aren't all web developers. And not every one of us has heard of the likes of WCAG. Think of the amount of us in society who post on social media. For some, that's a daily occurrence. And what about those of us who regularly create documents in the workplace or write reports, put together presentations, send emails or write invoices and so on? Think of how many of us upload a video or maybe a podcast, or run Teams or Zoom calls, or maybe even deliver webinars like this. Content creators can be absolutely any one of us, any age, in any context, and with any ability. Essentially, most of us in society potentially contribute to most of the forms of digital content out there. It's not just websites. And if all of us knew and applied some basic principles, imagine the difference that could make. Of course, the basics alone don't make content fully accessible. We know that. And there are comprehensive standards for that. But not having accessibility applied at all, which we know happens, or people just not being aware of digital accessibility, means we have an enormous amount of everyday digital content out there at scale that is still creating significant barriers for people. And this is a huge challenge to widespread progress of creating a digitally accessible world. Now think of this in terms of the principles behind the social model of disability. The social model puts forward that people are disabled by barriers in society, not specifically by their impairment or difference. And many reports are showing progress that is slow when it comes to addressing digital accessibility, and too much of our digital content is still inaccessible. Yet every form of everyday digital content that's created by us has the potential to be inclusive, instead of creating barriers, frustrations, or outright exclusion when it doesn't work with assistive tech. But maybe all of that inaccessible content could be because many people in our wider society just don't know about digital accessibility, or may not even be aware of the little things they could be doing to create everyday content that is accessible, or at least create content with less barriers for people to be able to engage with it or use it. Even some basics can make a real difference at scale, but only if they're put in place. And that brings with it the question of how can a society prevent digital barriers if a lot of society is just not aware it needs to be there to enable people, or even how to do it? Well, this got us at UCAF thinking, what is that everyday knowledge that every single one of us really should be aware of to be inclusive and supportive of others in our digital world? What messages should we be promoting to everyone in society who regularly creates all sorts of content? What should those real basic foundational expectations be of every single one of us? We all currently have some form of awareness training around other issues of equality and inclusion. Or shouldn't we really be extending this to everyone now about digital content too? Just so people know what it means to be inclusive as well as included in our digital society. Well, at the moment, there appear to be barriers to this, with many people making assumptions about learning around the basics of digital accessibility, and this impacts engagement. Many often think and assume that digital accessibility is someone else's responsibility, possibly the web designers or the techie people, or it's a particular niche set of people who do it, or it's complex, time consuming, and expensive. Well, yes, digital accessibility is a very broad and complex topic, but being aware of important things like adding headings or considering colour contrast really aren't complex at all. And if you search online, you seem to just find technical guidance, mainly relating to web accessibility code or the WCAG standards. And all of that can reinforce all of these assumptions of complexity. It certainly isn't aimed at beginners. But there are some everyday basic things that can make a difference too. And every one of us could adopt these no matter what IT skills we have. Think of the basics like descriptive hyperlinks, color contrast, or even camel case hashtags. These are some of those foundations that we need everyone to embrace as everyday practice so that everyone can play their part in being inclusive in our digital world. Well, we at UCAF want to explore this from a guidance perspective so we can move in this very direction to support more people. A bite-size approach was suggested at our latest UCAF subject areas meeting as something we could adopt across the range of our guidance. So as well as our comprehensive documentation, we're also considering offering bite-size options for beginners too. This would potentially be guidance that's more approachable, broken down and easier to learn bit by bit, perfect for those who are busy, or those of us who are just beginners, or those of us who just need a quick and easy reference guide to refer back to. And what if with this foundational approach we could kickstart everyone, even our next generation in schools, to adopt these basic principles and apply them by default and as the norm as a lifelong skill set? Every one of us needs to start somewhere, but at least if we tailored our support around digital accessibility at UCAF to reach everyone at every level, potentially more of us would start to learn. And as we know, every little helps, and then every little bit more keeps that momentum going. So before we embark on this type of bite-sized approach at UCAF, we're keen to know what these entry-level or beginner basics could actually look like. So this brings us back to our title, What 10 Things, and something we want your help with. What kind of bite-sized guidance could do both of these things? What are those absolute basics of digital accessibility that, if adopted, could make the biggest impact to address inaccessible everyday content? And what basic principles of bite-sized guidance would be ideal for beginners at any age, including schools? We'd love you to put 10 things forward to help us identify where we could start with these ideas. You can follow the address of www.ucaf.org to get to our survey, or you can use the QR code on screen to take you directly to our form. Thank you so much for listening and for your help with our future plans at UCAF. All of us have the potential to make a difference, one bit of digital content at a time.